Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and today I'm going to be doing a tier list. I don't think I've done one of these, like in this style, in quite some time. I think I maybe did it for like the Savage encounters, and then for my Final Fantasy games, like least to most favorite or something like that. But yeah, I haven't done this one. I normally do rankings from like what I like the least to what I like the most. But I got a request on Twitch to do this the other day, specifically a tier list for the ultimate mechanics across all 5 ultimate encounters. And at first I was like, I don't really have any plans to do that. I don't know. Is that something people really find interesting? Found out that I guess the reason I was asked is because my mutuals are doing it. So I was like, all right, I guess people want to see that. So here we are. I'm going to be ranking all of the ultimate mechanics from rankings, but S, A, B, C, and just F. Just skip D and E. To be fair, if you get a D, that's basically an F. But yeah, I guess we'll just go through that today. Before we get to the tier list, though, this video has a sponsor, and it's none other than Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis. This free-to-play game lets you replay entries from the Final Fantasy VII series with a mix of updated retro graphics and modern remake-style graphics. Utilize its familiar ATB combat system to play through parts of Final Fantasy VII, Crisis Core, and even the new original First Soldier story. You get to meet Sephiroth in his youth and get to dive a little deeper into that while playing as some other new characters. Now, right now, you can enjoy the holiday spirit with the Holy Flames Gift event. See what Avalanche has planned for the holidays while earning tons of rewards. You can even take a shot at getting unique weapons for Barret and Aerith, as well as a holiday-themed outfit for Aerith herself. Now, not only is Ever Crisis available on iOS and Android, but it also very recently released on Steam. This had me pumped when I saw it, and it runs so smooth. Link your mobile data to Steam and continue from where you left off on mobile. You can even log in before January 7th to get a bonus 1,000 crystals to help you get some weapons. So if you want to try out Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis and support the channel, simply click the link in the description or use the QR code on the screen and give the game a shot. Thanks to Square Enix again for sponsoring this video, and with that, let's talk about some ultimates. Now, looking at the mechanics, it looks like they're all broken apart. Funnily enough for me, they're color-coded. Not the best, but I think I'll make do. It looks like the first one on the list, the ads one, that's UCOB. The one next to it is Uwu. The one next to that, the Alpha Omega one, is Omega, obviously. Then the red one, that color I know, is T, and then the color next to that is DSR. That'll be the last time I hopefully have to mention the colors of the mechanics for the rest of the video. But yeah, that's so at least they are kind of coded so I can remember what goes where, because obviously ads, triple threat, I would have never referred to ads phase and UCOB as that, but it's a good way to start. Speaking of good way to start, ads is an easy ass. I barely even need to explain that. That's one of the best multi-target phases that we have across all the ultimates. I mean, what are you even comparing it to? Like BJCC, I actually think that's a really good phase. But then what else? I mean, doesn't have, do you consider the Magitech pits multi-target? Maybe the jails, like breaking a jail out in Titan, the nails in E-Free. Like, I guess there's multi-target in all of them, but they don't really feel like ad phases, I suppose. So I think this is one of the better done ones, and it's surprising that it's one of the few spots in UCOB that feels like it's aged well, whereas with Gear, we've kind of just made a good like half of the fight completely laughable. I mean, you could take Mad L's and Golden Bahamut and just roll through it all the same. That's a really strong start. That's an easy ass. I don't even need to think about that. Then we come to Annihilation. Annihilation, as weird as it's going to sound, is actually one of my favorite mechanics across all of the ultimates. Let me make sure. Am I remembering it correctly? You have Predation, which is like the AoE fest. You have Suppression, which is the transition into the second half of Ultima, and Annihilation. Yeah, I guess it depends on, well, it says Predation up until Untargetable Ultima after Tumults. So yeah, that's the Annihilation cast. That's not how I would judge it, but I mean, I guess that makes sense. I like the entire sequence from after the initial Predation until Suppression cast. That's like my favorite sequence in all the ultimates because it's so uptime heavy while making you do a ton of different movements. And I always prefer uptime mechanics to pure downtime mechanics. So Annihilation having this kind of crossroads of everything. It's a crossroads of the Garuda buff from the start of the fight, the tanks actually doing the orbs to determine something later, and the movements are so specific and It's just really satisfying to do. That's actually another S rank for me. I know a lot of people like laugh at Ultima because it's really easy, but I just love the way Annihilation looks. I just wish it could encompass the parts before and after it, because that is just like one giant uptime. It's like an uptime sandwich where the downtime bread is predation and suppression, and then everything in between to me is like Annihilation. But that's still an S rank even with just the part it's specifying. Alpha Omega. Do I want to put that in A, or is that going to be another S? I'm surprised how many like really strong ones are alphabetically in order, because it looks like these are all in alphabetical order. Of final phases, Alpha Omega is pretty up there. You know, some of them have gotten worse over time just because of like mitigation or gear making them less. Like Golden Bahamut's not as strong as it used to be. The end of Ultima's much, less impressive than it used to be. T, I've never really liked the final sequence all that much, so that one's probably going to rank low. DSRs, I think, is really good, but the fact that it's just 3 mechanics on repeat knocks it down. But Alpha Omega, I mean, it is basically 3 or 4 mechanics on repeat, but they remix them, not to mention the big limit break section at the end. My rice is done. I can hear it beeping over there. Hey, I'm recording. I'll deal with you later. Am I seriously going to have to put the first 3 in S? I think I do, only because there's 5 rankings, and if I think about it, it's probably the best mechanical one of the 5. I mean, it's between that and DSR, but I think there's enough. There's more mounting pressure. I don't know. I definitely felt the most like heart pounding and heart like aching for Alpha Omega. I didn't really feel that with the other ones, even Uwu, where I have my classic clip. You're my bitch now! I think this also goes in S. There's got to be something that doesn't go in S here. So, I mean, it's off to way too strong of a start. Okay, Blackfire. That's definitely not an S. I don't even think that's an A. I think that's kind of like an average mechanic when I think about it. Because nothing's necessarily wrong with Blackfire in UCOB, but it's not like a standout thing. You know what I mean? It's one of those... I wouldn't really change it or alter it, but it's not the most exciting either. It's a few quick movements, and it's always kind of been the same difficulty. It hasn't really gotten any easier. It's just, a few concise movements and then you're done. So yeah, I'm going to stick that in average. I don't think it's fantastic, but it's okay. Now, talking about getting away from S rank, then we come to BJCC. I think ads in UCOB I like more than BJCC. Maybe that's my PTSD kicking in, because Nisi is not something I wanted to see again. I feel like with T, I get these kind of mixed feelings, because T was missing a lot of things I felt were iconic to Alexander as someone who played through Heaven's Ward and lived through it. I mean, Living Liquid is missing so much, but then when you get to BJCC, I was waiting for height. Like, that would have been the perfect place to throw height. There's a lot of things that aren't present. I mean, one of the most iconic pieces of T to me is not Link Up and Brute Justice, which it uses. It's when Brute Justice splits and everything is just in the room. It's funny because it is a downtime mechanic, which I said I'm not usually a big fan of, but that is like iconic to me. And the idea of doing that with Cruise Chaser mixed in as well. Oh no, imagine if that had limit cut. Downtime from Brute Justice. Oh no. So I think on the Virtue alone, of it really just being kind of the Nisi passes and the deepest, I think it's an excellently crafted phase, but it's not a personal favorite. It's definitely one of the highlights of T as a whole, but I'm going to stick that in good, just because I feel like it's very front-loaded, and then they kind of take it easy on you for that back half once you've actually done the Nisi, and then it's just like, some tank damage. It's the 1 HP, the jump, the laser, which I don't think is a very impressive thing. Yeah, I'm going to stick that in A. I feel okay with that. Now, Double Dragons. This is also one that's either between A or S. It's one of the few phases in DSR I don't hate thinking about. And keep in mind, me hating thinking about it does not mean I think that parts of it are bad. It's just like, that's the damage that DSR did to me long term. I don't know, because the bouncing of the HP I think is a fine mechanic, but the way it's done is kind of strange, where it's just like 2 individual points. I think like Hand of Pain and Living Liquid's a more interesting same HP mechanic. It's also so easy to swing the HP the other way that it gets kind of like it's less fun trying to manage the HP. than it is in again, Living Liquid. But then Wrath Flame and the dance that goes with that, the sequence at the very end, I think the fire passes, the threat of death is all very ultimate worthy. And it is a really high difficulty and execution phase so late into a fight. You know, often with ultimates, you know, they kind of take it easy on you once you start getting into those deeper parts. And not here. I think, that's tough. S or A? It's definitely S or A. I don't think it's just good. See, I kind of wish it was broken up and like Wrath Flames was one mechanic, because this is more like a whole phase and less of a mechanic. So, yeah, because Wrath Flames is like an S and everything else is just kind of okay. But it's like, it's very exact for the entirety of the phase. It's very fast. There's good AoE optimization, which I think is missing in a lot of ultimates. I'm going to give it the S. I think it's deserving of it. It does enough things right. And it's got that like late fight kind of nerve check, even though it's not the final phase. Yeah, that belongs in S. Run Dynamis Delta. I think that's my favorite mechanic of Phase 5 of Omega Protocol, and it's the very first one. It's the one that's like the craziest to look at in a nutshell, and it's also, I think, the most satisfying one to pull off. Like, I don't really care for like the markers and the tethers in Sigma all that much, and then being knocked into the towers. Like, I find that I'm kind of bored in Sigma versus in Delta. And then the last one is like ultra easy. It's really just one final attention check. If anything, whoever's doing marking, like we had one person marking people during that mechanic to say where to go. That person either hates it more or likes it more because it's way more involved. And I think that little bit of a check kind of bumps up the last one. I'm gonna give Delta that. Honestly, I could stick it in S, but like I'm not. I'm gonna give it A, because I think that there's too much downtime at the start when you're getting set up for it. And even though it's then kind of shotguns the mechanics, the little sections where it gives you a bunch of time to deal with the tethers and get into position, and there's like just these weird downtimes to give you time to think. And not that that's a bad thing. I think it's very much needed, but it just kind of slows it down for me just a little bit. But it's definitely my favorite of the Run Dynamis mechanics. Then you get Nidstinian. It says Nidhogg P3 in total. I'm assuming that means it's just including the Knights being P1. That makes perfect sense. P3 in total. I guess I should look. Eyes is its own. I really thought maybe they would include Eyes, but I think this is better to have it split. That's one of the best phases. Super executionally heavy. Very, very much dependent on everyone understanding. It's ultra fast. It's like 2.5 minutes or something like that for the entirety of the phase. Honestly, kind of, I think one of the masterclass sections, you know, DSR kind of going off strong. I think both, I think if anything, I could knock Double Dragon down to A, because I do like the Nidstinian phase more, but I think they're near equal at the same time. If anything, can I do this? There we go. Yeah, I think I'll do that. I'll put Double Dragon below Nidstinian, but keep it in S rank. I think that's fair. And apparently a bunch of DSR mechanics begin with D. Go figure. Dragon King Thornton. So that's an A for me. I kind of mentioned it earlier. I'm putting Alpha Omega in S, and then I'm going to do the other 5 phases kind of from like, you know, A, B, C, and F. Terrible. I don't know that I feel like terrible, never do it again. But yeah, Dragon King Thornton, I think it'd be S if there wasn't such a quick and easy solution to the X's. But even that, man, the safe spot for that, you have to like laser focus in a specific spot and make sure you land in it. Because if you're a pixel too far, like to the left or the right, you underrun, overrun in any capacity, and you get a pattern where you're completely surrounded in that spot, it's really bad for like trying to survive. I don't mean bad mechanically. I mean just like it's very exacting. Whereas everything else is okay. Like the mitt checks are good, the heal checks are good. They've gotten a little easier with strategies that have come out. You know, using the tank invulns for those, I think, has gone a long way. And I really like the auto attack dancing. I think the auto attack dancing is the only thing that makes me kind of want to put it in S tier. I think it's just everything else in between just it kind of just, the way it loops is very unintuitive. Like Alpha Omega, I mentioned earlier, when they loop the same mechanic back again, the order and how they're combined is completely different. They still have the near and far auto, not nearly as interesting, but between that and the limit break section, it's just way more cinematic, way more fun, and the cast time at the end is way more stressful than just the really, really, in my opinion, lame final hit. Like Dragon King Thornton's final hit's very similar to Golden Bahamut's final hits, but comparatively to Ultima, to T, to Alpha Omega, they're very non-cinematic, which is hilarious because DSR is like an ultra cinematic encounter. Very, very story focused, but that final bit, yeah, I think those few bits knock it down to A. Then Death of the Heavens. You know, of all, that's the only part of Phase 5 I think that's even good. But is it S or is it A? That's the question. I think, yeah, I don't know. I don't really care for the meteor section. I feel like that kind of kills it a little bit for me, but like the Doom lineup and needing to get such exact positioning, I feel like that's tough. I mean, I've got a lot of thoughts on Death of the Heavens, so it's not an easy one to do. I definitely place it above Wrath. And I actually think Wrath is pretty good. Wrath is quintessential. You're doing UCOB again, which kind of also knocks it down to, I think, average. But we won't even get to Wrath because it's alphabetical until way later. So Death of the Heavens. Yeah, I don't know. Am I about to put another DSR mechanic in S? I don't know. I don't know that it deserves S compared to like the entirety of Nidstini and the entirety of Double Dragon. Like, do you notice that S rank is like the ones that are almost all entire phases except for Annihilation so far? Like, Death of the Heavens is one thing that happens in Phase 5. And the rest of Phase 5 not too impressive, but it is the best thing about it. I'm gonna knock it to A. I think Death of the Heavens is better than most of the other mechanics in the fight, but is not as good as Nidstinian or Double Dragon, especially for how late in the fight it is. But it also gets points for the music amping up during it. I love that little detail. I'm somebody who doesn't just value the mechanic, but also the cinematic nature of it. And when the music picks up during Death of the Heavens, that's pressure. That's honestly pressure, and I love it. But I'm gonna stick it in A. Ugh. Then we get to Eyes. I don't think Eyes is very good. I don't even think it's average. It's just not very fun. Like, everyone I know shares my opinion that Eyes is kind of like, from Eyes until Death of the Heavens is kind of just Snoozeville. Like, even just going into the phase, like needing to just be stacked up with the tethers, like that's not even very interesting. And then it just steals the mechanic like straight from Nidhogg Extreme and does it a little more involved. Like, you know, obviously the way you handle the orbs and the way you handle the chain passes is different, but it's, yeah, I don't know. I feel like it hasn't evolved enough from all that. And it's not fun. It's not very evolved from the Savage version, only barely to make it ultimate level. And it's a real big downer because it's right after what I gave an S rank and that of Nidstini. I would almost consider them combined, but I'm glad they're separated because I would have had to have knocked Nidhogg down if it included Eyes. Yeah, I don't like Eyes. I wouldn't ask for that phase again, in all honesty. Especially the favoritism towards line AoEs. Like, line AoEs are great in ultimates that have multi-targets most of the time because it's usually easier to line up to enemies than it is to get them close enough to AoE. It depends on the phase and the strat, but yeah, I don't know. I don't care for it very much. Then you get Fate projections. So we have Fate projection Alpha, Beta, and Final Word. Is Final Word... Which one is Final Word? Is Final Word the mechanic, the other mechanic? And I'm going to have to double check. I think it is. I think it's not Trines. No. What is Final Word? Wormhole? Final Word? Final Word is that the Enrage? Oh, no, that can't be the Enrage. Is it? Rewind. Hold on. I'm looking at the rest of them. Inception, Limit Cut, Time Stop, Trines, Worm. Oh, yeah, it has to be. It has to be the Enrage for T. Okay, well, either way, let me focus on Fate Projection Alpha. Of the two of them, this one I don't really care for at all. I think the Fate projections are one of those. It's really cool when you go from not having it figured out to seeing what it's like with the True Heart buff. But in isolation, they're really like sad. That entire last like 6 minutes of T, it's not like a pushover, but it's not much better than Ultima, in my opinion. Like in terms of, if anything, it's more boring to me than Ultima. I don't know, like it's almost sad when you wipe there. You're like, oh, how did that even happen? You know? So Fate Projection Alpha, it feels harsh to call it bad. You know, I don't think it's bad, but I think it's bad for an ultimate. It's just not very. It's more interesting to see and to describe than it is to do. So I'm gonna stick Fate Projection Alpha in bad, but it's only kind of barely bad. And honestly, it's only there because I think Fate Projection Beta is a little bit better. I think so. I'm gonna put that in average because the way that you have to do the push and the pull with the debuffs, I think is a little better than the stacks in either the stacks or the spreads. I think there's just a lot more that you need to kind of understand. Whereas almost the entirety of Fate Projection Alpha is determined by where the safe spot is. And that's just like an attention check. Whereas Beta is a genuine position and movement and being able to identify where safe spots are and, you know, communicate which thing is it. There's just a lot more pattern recognition. There's a lot more on the fly, like what do I need to do versus which debuff do I have? Am I on the left or the right, or am I on the opposite side from the party? And then do I jump or do I stand still? Like there's a chance that all Fate Projection Alpha is just you spamming spacebar or just you not doing anything. It's only interesting when you have to swap between the two. So yeah, I'm putting Fate Projection Beta in average and Fate Projection A Alpha in bad. Then Final Word. I think that's you know, I wanted to put the enrages kind of from S to F, but again, I feel like F is too harsh because I don't really hate any of them. Like they're like none of them are terrible, never do again. You know what I mean? So I think Final Word goes below Dragon King Thornton. Oh no, actually, I'm sorry. Dragon King Thornton that includes the enrage though. That's the thing. Like Dragon King Thornton is all of Dragon King Thornton, and this is just. Unless I misremember, I'm just going to Google Final Word. T Final Word. Like I need to know that it literally has to be the very there's nothing else here. Is Perfect Alexander here as a whole phase? No, he's not. So yeah, it literally has to be like, so yeah, okay. That's it. Yeah, that's fine. I actually think it's mechanically not as interesting. Yeah, compared against all of Dragon King Thornton, now I feel like it's average because it is just standing still in 8 different places and then finishing off the boss. But it's so cool cinematically. You know what though? It's also just a rip of Ultima dragging people. The only difference is you're getting to choose the order now. Now that I think about it, it's kind of just average. It gets an S for showmanship. It gets a B for functional, I suppose. Okay, and then Fell Ruin. That's the one where it's all 3 of them kind of huddled around the middle. And then you have to, you know, nail jumps and then does the donut. And then you have to get into the Neuralink. It's kind of not like a big favorite of mine. It's kind of similar to Blackfire. The funniest thing about Fell Ruin is you learn how bad people are at spreading. People, when you're progging it and you're just like, okay, we all have our spread directions and somehow 2 people just end up on top of each other. Yeah, I mean, it's I wouldn't call it bad. It's average. I feel like a lot of the trios are average. It's just the few that aren't average. Is it better than Fate Projection Beta? Maybe I shouldn't have started ordering them based on how I felt. We're going to abandon that unless I make mention of it specifically. Because honestly, I don't want to have to grade them all from best from left to right as well. I'd rather just have them in the list. Yeah, I think it's another average one. So that's where I'm going to stick Fell Ruin. Nothing fancy, but it's not bad. Man, Garuda? Okay, so do I judge this based on how it's supposed to be done? Or do I judge this based on how people do it? Or do I judge it based on the fact that that's even an option? So Garuda, it's most common to wake her late. But I've done a bunch of Ultimas where we wake her early. And it's not that much different. It's different enough that it's at least mildly more interesting, in my opinion. So, yeah, I don't think it's... I think if you were to judge it based solely on doing it the way that a lot of people do it, it ends up in C tier. I think it's only average if you do it otherwise. Yeah, I wouldn't call it good. Hi, Ivy. You just licked my hand. Yeah, I wouldn't call it good. It would be average at best. I'm going to go based on how... Yeah, but if I do that one how it's intended, then some of the other ones start to change versus like the average experience. But yeah, I'm going to stick it in bad because the fact that it's even designed like that is not intentional. Like they've gone out and said like that wasn't what we wanted. We wanted you to do the one where you wake her early like all the rest of them. But it was an oversight in how we designed the fight, so they weren't going to change it. I got to give the devs credit for admitting they made a mistake, but they weren't going to fix it because it was their bad and people figured out a way to do it that was better than them. So they kind of honor that, and that's a good example. But because of the average experience, honestly, it gets a bad. It's not a very interesting phase. Like it's the plumes, and the plumes make up like most of it, and then the tethers at the end. The most interesting thing about it is that you need the debuffs for way later. It also has the heal check, which is cool and all, but the nail heal check is, you know, pretty much the same. So yeah, that ends up in bad for me. I feel bad putting that there, but I got to move on. Grand Octet. Grand Octet is just 8 dive bombs and then some positioning. Is it anything really that spectacular? You run in a circle and then everyone screws it up. I mean, most people just tank LB through it at this point and just like try not to get murdered by the dive bomb. Like that's literally the whole thing. Like and again, I gotta go based on how we do it. Even on content, it wasn't like terribly interesting. I think at best it's average. You know, it sucks because Grand Octet used to be like this really kind of hype thing when it was first reached, but once it was figured out, it really kind of just doesn't hold up compared to it's really depressing when you wipe on Grand Octet. But the fact that the tank LB3 strat is like really common to make up for that common mistake where people don't know which tower they're going to get. Like that's it. That's the whole thing, is aiming Twintania away and making sure to get a tower and that the other 3 people share the split. Like it's just, there's so few actual moving parts once you look at it. So yeah, that's going in average. And then Golden Bahamut. Yeah, Golden Bahamut kind of ends up in average too. It hasn't aged well. I think it's the least interesting of the final phases. Music and aesthetics, the hype it generates, all great. But I don't think they carry it well enough anymore. The pressure of dying and losing the Phoenix buff has been lost a lot. On content, it was there. It was a really solid mid check, but I don't think it's aged gracefully. I'm just trying to base it off now. So yeah, I'm going to say Golden Bahamut. You know what though? I think average is the right place for Golden Bahamut because I think it is the golden standard, pun intended, of what a final phase ultimate is to be expected. It's that last little push with whatever damage you can muster without making any mistakes because you can't afford to because of the enrage or because of a buff or debuff. Like that is the standard that was defined here. And I feel like it's done a good job of keeping that. Even though I think Ultima kind of pushes it one step further, and I really like how Ultima handles its enrage sequence, I think Golden Bahamut should be considered a solid average. It's just, if there's ever anything in bad for the final phase, we're in trouble, like in the future. And then Heaven's Fall. Heaven's Fall is the first major block of UCOB that people get to in the Bahamut phase. Not that you can't get stuck on Blackfire or Felrune, but what's the last one? Quick March. That's the other one. But it's kind of like Quick March plus the towers, but it's so easy to screw up. It's really down to the knockback from the towers, just getting people. The different dive bomb formations can sometimes screw people. The twisters during the dive bombs can always screw people. I mean, twisters are twisters after all. Do I think it's incredible? No. Do I think it's good? Yeah, it's definitely a step above a lot of the other trios. And I think that's true of Heaven's Fall and 10 Strike when I get to it. But it's definitely not incredible. I like it more than the rest of them. Hello World. Oh, this is tough. Hello World. I love that it's like one giant mechanical dance, but it's such a static dance that like it's always the same 4 order of operations. It's just a matter of who got which ones first. Like, is it blue defamation first or red defamation first? You know, like that's it. And that's like the major determining factor. Everything else is so oddly like just the same every time you do it, and it makes doing it on repeat much less exciting. It's funny because the normal Hello World in Omega is a little bit more involved. Calling it more involved is probably incorrect because it's not nearly as long of a sequence, but I feel like there's a lot more thought that goes into the original Hello World versus the top Hello World, which is just too much of the same thing. There's so many debuffs. There's only one logical way to solve it. It's a good example of raids how having too many things often makes the solution too simple because you've just limited what is even remotely possible. Most interesting thing about Hello World was when we didn't think about not giving the last two people defamation. So we thought we had to do defamations during monitors. Like, it was more interesting like that. Honestly, I stick Hello World in bad. I don't hate doing it, but when I think about how it worked out logistically, it's kind of just lame, I guess is the way I would put it. Speaking of lame, I'm putting Ifrit in bad. I don't care for this phase at all. That's my least favorite part in literally every... I don't think it's terrible. Again, terrible is such a hard thing. Sorry, I gotta put my cat over here. Terrible is such a hard category for me personally because I don't think there's very many things that are please never do it again bad versus just... I don't enjoy it as much as everything else. Maybe that's just my personality. But Ifrit, I mean, the music isn't very good. Especially, I don't really like the Primal's remix of Ifrit's theme there. The wake mechanic is okay. The chain is just kind of silly. The healer fires that he shoots out, the searing winds, like, okay, they got to stand over there. The dashes, I think one positive point is being able to determine the order of the dashes is a really cool detail. But it's just like, it's such an uninteresting phase overall. Like the tank busters, nobody even does those. You just invuln them. So it's like, yeah, that one's going in bad. Ooh, Inception. So Inception's another weird one because I have to, the way, it's weird because when we figured it out, or when it was figured out, I should say, it became less interesting. Doing the part where you let the True Heart go through to Alexander and you have to DPS check the thing, I think is way more involved and pressure. Like, it's way tougher on the player than even just making the box. Like, it doesn't matter what alignment of the puddles you do. If you do a straight line, if you do the ball and shaft, or if you do the box strat, to me that doesn't even matter. Just setting that up and then watching it go through while you get in position for the next however many mechanics. To me, it's just way less interesting. I think it's more involved to need to think about how you're spending your 2 minutes on Alexander versus the resources you need for this versus crowd control you could need for it. And they take that away by doing it correctly. I'm almost willing to stick it in bad. I don't even think it's average. I think the intended way is cool thematically, but it just... It takes a lot out of it. Whereas if you have to do, but does that make it bad though? There's a big difference between something actively being bad versus just being average. I don't know. I think it has to go in average because I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. It's not like I hate doing it. In fact, I'm kind of just like, okay, chill during it. Just make sure you do it right. Make sure you get your position. Make sure you do the flamethrowers right. Make sure you do the jump and the slashes right. Like, all that is cool. And also, again, using the True Heart in place of the Inception crystals, I think is a really clever thing in order to determine where what is it called? It's not called Sanctity. It's called something. The laser. The Alexander laser. Yeah. No, I'm going to go with average on Inception. I don't think it's very good, but it's definitely not bad. Now, CC and J-Waves. I love J-Waves. I love the mounting pressure of the DPS check. We have very few soft DPS checks in Final Fantasy XIV where you just kind of, or soft enrages, where if it goes on too long, it just becomes unmanageable. So I have to appreciate them. But needing to kill, literally the only thing about this phase is needing to kill Cruise Chaser first. Like, that's as interesting as they were able to make it, which means you have to deal with the J-Waves longer. I think speed kill strats do it the other way. I think they actually kill Brute Justice first, if I remember. I remember some weird stuff, but I guess the intended way is to do Cruise Chaser, then go to Brute Justice. And then this is also just that long countdown. It's like 25 seconds of just hitting Alexander afterwards before the cast bar finishes. I'm going to go with bad. I think that J-Waves on its own is fine, but the fact they made a whole phase that revolves around J-Waves, and it's both way too long after you deal with the J-Waves and just adds one extra target to kill before you deal. That's like the most creative thing they could come up with. Like they couldn't have done something where there's like AoEs that need to be baited away, ground AoEs, or like maybe even the party has to like stand together. Like, I don't know. There's just nothing else. So yeah, I'm going to go with bad. I think they could have done a lot better on that one. LB spam transition into Ultima. You know, not very mechanically challenging, but I love when they make us use limit breaks, and I love the fact that they went out of their way to make this puzzle that we initially needed to figure out. This is one that the drawing board for it is awesome. Like, the sheer fact that it even exists, I think, is really cool. But it's definitely not incredible. I'm gonna put it in good. I think that it's just barely in good because it's just cool. It's cinematic. The limit breaks, like there's room for things to go wrong. We had to relearn. I'm thinking a lot of it from my Prague experience versus already knowing it exists. Like it's definitely less interesting now that we know, like everybody knows who does Ultima, that we need to do this waking thing. But I think it's good. I think stuff like that as like a check to make sure everything you did before was correct, and it being as cinematic as that's something that I want out of Ultimates. You know, that's something I would expect out of Ultimates if it were to happen at all. So that gets the points. Limit cut. Now this is either, for me, it's not going in bad, but for other people, I imagine it's either in bad because you hate limit cuts, especially now because they do limit cuts nonstop. Or you think it's good because it's one of the more involved phases. I think it's good. I'm going to throw limit cut in good. I think the main reason for throwing it in good is just because it is a very basic thing. It is an identity. Like it's super, super associated with Cruise Chaser and that original fight. And using the blasts that rotate around in order to force you to like really, I guess, understand your space or the spread. There's a few different strats. It's strict, but it's also open to a few different ways to do it. So it's just got a lot of the things that I think make a mechanic good. And I think it's a more involved transition phase. And the transition phases are hit or miss in Ultimates, but this is a good way to start it out. So that definitely gets a thumbs up. That's going in good. I think Living Liquid also has to go in good. I have my gripes with Living Liquid, so it doesn't go into incredible. I hate that it's really just the waves, like that the majority of the mechanics are dolls, which are super easy to overkill by accident or really tedious to get below the right HP point. And then it's really just the waves, but it sets the tone for the start of the fight and it really gets you going fast. Like a lot of Ultimates start slow, ramp up in the middle, and then have the nerve checks near the end. Living Liquid is like an ultra quick death and learning experience for someone who's brand new into an Ultimate. And it definitely sets the tone and the pace for what you should expect from an Ultimate. So, you know, honestly, C or F in terms of referencing the original fight and the things that made it as crazy as it was, but an A for how it overall plays into the entire fight. And mechanically, it is still quite exacting and fun. Looper. Is Looper C or F? You know, it's funny. I feel like I'm not going to be as strict on top mechanics. I actually like mechanics that are more random in who gets designed, who gets designated to go to spots. So I ended up actually liking Omega a lot. But Looper, it unfortunately has to deal with being the very first mechanic on top. And that's something that always comes under scrutiny, but it comes under more scrutiny here because Looper is one of those mechanics where it's not difficult to understand. It's not even that difficult to do, but it's so easy to slip up and die, and there's nothing worse than having a really good prog pull, coming back and wiping to Looper, or just wiping to Looper in general. It feels really bad when something goes wrong. I think Looper goes into F tier. I think it kind of inherited the F tier just because of where it's placed in the fight. If that was somewhere later and was, I don't know. I don't know what you could do to make it better, to be honest, because again, I don't think it's like inherently an awful thing. It just doesn't feel good to do in like any way. Like if you just watch my prog clear of it, it's just me yelling numbers at people throughout the entirety of Omega, to be honest. But Looper in particular feels worse than Pantocrator. So I'm going to stick that in F. Limitless Synergy. Now, Limitless Synergy, hold on, let me look at the list. Party Synergy. Is Limitless Synergy the Meteors? If that's the case, that one's also going to go quite low. It's been a while, so let me let me check my homework real quick. Let's see. Limitless Synergy. No, I don't want Limitless Blue. That's not what I want. Come on now. That's all I want is, yeah, Limitless Synergy is the second one. Yeah. That's not good. That's another F. These are the two worst mechanics in all of Top for me. It almost makes me want to put Hello World in average because I do think they're quite a bit below Hello World, but that's why D&E are missing, so it can be way below. Yeah, it's just like they lost the plot. Like they had an idea and then it just got completely destroyed by like you just don't even need to like separate or spread. Like it's literally just step forward and then two people take a dash and there's just one giant DPS check for like 45 seconds. It's like there's two mechanics and those barely even exist in there. So yeah, at the very least, the whole RNG where the dashes need to go and like what the angle is and everything with the Bard LB3 that's coming through. But it's just, it feels like half of a mechanic in an ultimate, and that's not good. Ooh, now monitors, I actually like monitors a lot, but I don't know that it belongs in good. I really like how precise it is for like getting it right. Oh man, when you get the 8 monitors, all the lasers flash on the screen and everyone's alive, that's a good feeling. I know some people don't like it because it messes with uptime, but I don't inherently find stuff that messes with uptime bad. I feel like it allows players who are more comfortable with the mechanic to look and perform better. People who are comfortable with the mechanic and pressing buttons at the same time to find ways around, like pressing like your Dancer AoE or like your Sage point blank AoE. Like there's ways around it. And then when you're like really uncomfortable with it, you can still get it done, but it affects the overall performance of the phase. So there's a lot riding on how comfortable you are to do monitors. Plus actually doing it correctly is very exacting. It's used in multiple phases, so I'm going to judge it based on how it's used across all of them and not just the one-time monitor hit that it's referring to in phase 3. I'm going to put it in, I think it's good. I think when one mechanic that's so simple has so much of an impact on how the entirety of the phase goes. And I think another thing is people are going to knock it because it's around the 2-minute window. I'm not going to blame the mechanic and how it's supposed to be done and how it lines up in the fight. That's a whole different problem with the 2-minute meta that I'm not going to entirely put onto the monitors mechanic. Yeah, I think it's good. I think a lot rides on it and doing it correctly. And I think it's very satisfying to do correctly. Nail. Now I really have to think, do I judge this based on how it is now or how it was to do back then? I mean, realistically, the only difference is Nail back then and Nail now is you might skip dive bombs now. And we used to have people manually put markers down in Nail phase, which is... like, it wasn't lame. It was really cool when we could do that. Thank you, T, for taking that away from us. But I think it's better now. I feel like a lot more people learned how to do it. I got to knock some points off for the RP mechanic and needing to either do the separate box or, you know, some people use callouts, you know, whatever it is. But everything else, I mean, the entire dance, the pressure to keep as many people alive, knowing how to adjust. There's a lot of expression for understanding the fight, you know, knowing, oh, when we have this many people alive, we have to be all in, or this person died and this person had this debuff, so now they need to make sure they get this next one. What are the odds you get it? There's a lot of knowledge can shine through, and it's definitely a faster paced phase than Twintania, and is even a little bit better than the start of Bahamut. I'm going to go ahead and stick Nail in good. I think Nail is good, just not incredible. It hasn't aged well, and I think that another thing is I don't want to put it in incredible. It is very much just turn 9 Savage. In fact, there's a mechanic missing from it. that's in turn 9 Savage. And I think in some ways turn 9 Savage handles the nail phase better, but the specific phase that I'm referencing here in the back half of the fight. But all the same, I mean, coming into that phase, it's really exciting that the Heavens Fall drop in is a really exciting way to get the phase started. And then the Doom Puddles and managing those and the position around the boss and the donuts, the ins and the outs. It's just a little too easy nowadays. But I think the core idea of it is good. It's on the good side. Run Dynamis Omega. I mentioned earlier how I think Run Dynamis Delta is the best of the three. I'm remiss to call Dynamis Omega bad, but compared to the rest of Phase 5, it's really just kind of meh. It's, you know, you do the 2 sword/leg/staff dodges with M and F, and then it's just about getting the rest of your jumps right on Hello Far and Hello Near, and then like 2 people who already have 3 grab tethers, and that's it. Yeah, it doesn't really do a whole lot, but to call it bad, that's tough. I don't know that I would want to call it bad. It's just kind of average. I think both Omega and Sigma are just kind of average for me. So I'm gonna put this here. I'm gonna put Run Dynamis Omega in average, because it could be so much better than it is. Even if it does have the little uptime phase at the beginning, I think it just could have been better. Then final Omega transition P4. Man, every part of me wants, like, mechanically, there's not a whole lot. This is one of those where the aesthetic and the design and it's so hype when you get through it the first time. I mean, I think the phase is hype. There's like this part after the second set of wave cannons where the rings fall off of Omega, and it sounds like he's exhausted. Like it hits the ground, and it's the sound of the metal clanging, but it sounds like he's going like he's like tired almost. And it makes sense because he's literally falling apart. The wave cannons feel super impactful. The positioning and the swaps are really quick. I think the damage could be a little bit higher from Omega, and it's not asking for, it's literally just spread stack, making sure to adjust, and then watching the little rings on the ground. But it's 45 seconds of pure adrenaline is how I feel about it. And I love that. Like I said, uptime phase is pure adrenaline. The pressure that mounts on you, especially in the initial time, the first time you do it. After that, it's just kind of frustrating if you don't do it right. I love phases like this, and I'd love to have more of them. These short 45-second, really involved transitions that are big mitt and heel checks, that are DPS checks. I'd love to have more of that. That's going in incredible for me. And then Pantocrator. So Pantocrator kind of suffers in the same way Looper does, in that it's not the first mechanic, it's the second mechanic. But it's definitely better than Looper. It's just a matter of how. I mean, at the very least, the positioning and the rotating and the mitt and everything it's way more interesting across all of that phase, I feel like. I feel like the end is kind of lame, though, where it's just the 6 lasers on the nearest players. But it's like you can just all spread out because the lasers are so thin. You don't have to do... Like in the original fight, we probably could have done it this way, too, but we didn't think to do it this way. But I guess it just kind of takes something out when you just go to 6 positions and wait for the end. Not to mention sometimes just, you know, the end of Pantocrator is just like, are we behind? Oh, we're so ahead. You have no idea because of the crits. But I'm not going to blame Pantocrator for that. I think Pantocrator is... I'm going to stick it in average, I think. It's not as annoying as Looper. It doesn't feel as bad to wipe on as Looper. But it's not... And it's not bad. It's just not good either. Yeah, I mean, that's what average is. And then we get Predation, up until untargetable Ultima after Tumults. That's not a very interesting part of Ultima. I think Predation itself is kind of cool, but it's just a bunch of AoEs. Like, it's literally just you dodge like the Titan, the first Titan AoE, and then it's just getting in the spot for the second one. And then, honestly, the part where, you know, you have the Ifrit baits and then you have the jails in the middle, it's very cinematic and chaotic. Like, when you look at that phase as someone who's never played Final Fantasy before, it's crazy to see Titans stomping and the Garudas doing the point-blank AoEs and the screams with the double moves for the feather and then the tank explosion plus the homing missile in there, you know, right after you did this giant, massive, room-wide AoE where there's barely any space to avoid anything, and you got to count the runes on the ground. Like, it definitely, again, is a tone setter. So I wouldn't call it bad, but I'm not gonna call it good because there's really not a whole lot. It looks cooler than it is to do. I said that about another mechanic here, but yeah, it looks cooler than it is to do. Okay, speaking of which, Primal Roulette. I mean, I guess that's the entirety. It says it includes the Etheric Boom, so this is the entirety of the Enrage sequence then. Because, I mean, that has to include. So I'm going to judge this based entirely on the Enrage sequence. The Etheric Boom, I think, is, again, it's not really cool to, like, look at, but I really like what they did where, again, they tie a lot of the parts of Ultima together. Like, this is going back to Annihilation, and how you decided to handle Etheric Boom is entirely reflected on your performance in Annihilation, you know, making sure you have the right number of people take the orbs, how much you want to actually risk the Etheric Booms touching versus, versus how much you want to feed the Enrage, because the more people who take the Annihilation orbs, the faster the Enrage will come later. So the comfort of the party plays in, and I really like that being rewarded in a later mechanic. The Primals themselves, the most interesting thing to me about them is how much untargeted MIT you need to manage. Very rare do we have this much time to or this much effort put into untargeted MIT. And it can make the phase a little bit scarier. Also, being able to get an early LB in that phase helps a lot with being able to get through the LBs later, but that's not really a thing anymore because you sometimes barely have enough LB to LB3 for the Ultima cast. So that's more concerning than anything else. And then the Enrage sequence of it, like picking the party members up and deleting them and going, is really, really cool. If I'm going to put Golden in B, and I like this more than Golden, it's very similar to, but I put Final Word there. Final Word is, yeah, I mean, again, it's just standing still. Because this involves so many more mechanics, as much as I think Final Word, not even killing everyone, and just stopping time, I think it's really awesome. I think the Primal Roulette plus the Enrage at the end where he's picking people up and eliminating them is more interesting than Final Word is as a standalone. It's one of those where there's too much in one thing, and balancing it out versus just the one thing in Final Word is a lot tougher. Like, if it was Trines plus Final Word, honestly, the rankings would probably be the same, but I would feel a lot better about the placement overall. Party Synergy, honestly, that's either A or S. I love Party Synergy. It's one of the hardest mechanics in all of Top. Unironically, Party Synergy ends up being one of the hardest mechanics. There's so many different permutations of it, positions you can end up, swaps you need to do. You can't really appreciate it when you see it done well, but there are so many individual elements that go into doing the mechanic properly that it just gets mad respect from me. And you don't have a whole lot of time to do it either. Like, they really push you to do it fast. It's like, it's one of those things that's perfectly paced like an ultimate mechanic should be, with the level of execution I expect from an ultimate mechanic. Only problem is it's a downside mechanic, but I still think it's one of the best mechanics in all of Top. Rewind. Like I said, Rewind, Eyes, and Wrath of the Heavens are all kind of like Snoozeville. That's like, cinematically, Rewind is an S. It's one of the coolest things to have like gotten into in Prague and to realize and to have to do. And I also love the detail. If you do Rewind the same way you do Phase 1 against the Knights, or Phase 0, however you want to call it, you can just keep looping the fight. I mean, there's literally like a rewind percentage. I don't know how many rewinds people have beaten DSR with. I know that there's at least one single rewind kill. I haven't kept up to see if there's any more. But the fact that it even works like that, I love. But mechanically, it just being an earlier phase, but there's more raid-wide pulsing AoEs and an extra DPS check at the end that's not really all that tough to beat. How much credit can I really give it for being super cool thematically when it mechanically is so underwhelming? I mean, it's just Vault Knight's final phase again, but you have to do it slightly differently. Do I really want to put that in bad? Is it bad? It's like such a cool idea. It's just not, yeah, I think just because it's a recycled phase done slightly differently, it's going to go in bad. Because it's cooler to think about than it is to do. I've said stuff like that the whole video, but it's true. Okay, Quick March, I think I'm going to put in average alongside Blackfire and Fell Ruin. Actually, you know what? I think Quick March I like a little bit better than Blackfire and Fell Ruin. So Quick March sets the tone for the dive bombs, specifically for there being twisters during the dive bombs. That initial shock is really cool. It adds a little bit more pressure. And the positioning with the positioning with coming out of the dive bombs into the Earth Shakers, plus the Tank Busters, plus the stack. I think all of that is done really well. There's some good healing and MIT that needs to be considered with the random Mega Flare hits on top of the stacked Mega Flare hits, plus on everyone else. It's not terribly difficult, but it's what I would consider a good trio. Like if I got that in, if I got something similar in an Ultimate nowadays, I would be like, oh, that's just Quick March. But I'd also be like, I'd be like, okay, that's good. I mean, we use Quick March as kind of like a designation for a lot of fights. Like people who have done UCOB go, oh, it's like Quick March positioning. That's how people know, like, it's like the lining up on the side, you know, how to get the order. So it's one of those mechanics that people who did it use it as a reference for other mechanics. And when you make a good mechanic, that's something that is easy to do. You know, it's not all the time, but like the fact that it's so useful with everything else and is the first mechanic you do in UCOB, in the Bahamut phase in particular, I think it just trend sets a little bit better than the other ones. So yeah, that's going to go in good. I like that a little better than Blackfire and Fell Ruin. Run Dynamis Sigma. I think I said I was going to stick that in average as well. Just because I don't really care that much for Sigma or Omega versus Delta. There's a lot riding on Sigma, but I don't know. It's just nothing about it really excites me. You know, just waiting to see how you have to do the lineup and the knockbacks. I think mechanically it is good. I don't dislike it mechanically. I just don't like it as much as Delta, and I like it about as much as Omega. I'm not like thrilled about it, so it just goes an average for that reason. That's really it. Strength of the Ward. Now, excuse me for not remembering. I think Strength of the Ward is the first one, isn't it? It's been a long time since I've been back in there in DSR. Strength of the Ward. So I think, yeah, here, let me grab this. Let me just look on the YubTubs real quick. Yeah, Sanctity is the Meteors and Strength is the first one. Huh. Strength of the Ward, I don't know. I don't care that much for it. It's kind of in a similar vein to Looper, but I think it's better than Looper, where it's just like it's the first thing you got to do on every reset, so it kind of just ends up feeling worse, even if in a nutshell it maybe isn't that bad of a mechanic. So it's one of those, like, it's kind of skewed points of view. I mean, it's at first it's literally just a bunch of dive bombs into the Quakes and dodging the conal AoE, the baited AoE, I guess I should say. And then it's just the small stack and the spread. And then, yeah, I don't know. Is it bad? The problem is I don't like bad. I feel like I need a D ranking here for below average and bad. Because for me, that's a jump, I suppose. I'm going to stick it in average. I don't think it's good by any measure. Again, it sets the tone, but by that point, it's just, I don't know. I feel like the Vault Knights also take some of the thrill out of it, because the Vault Knights, I think, are actually done fairly well, surprisingly well, actually. And Strength of the Ward just, I don't know, it's a little bit slow to start for me. And it's a downtime phase, so quick into the fight, like, come on. Then we have Suppression. I'm going to put Suppression in good, actually. I think Suppression is a decent downtime phase. It gives everyone a position. It gives everyone an idea of what they're going to need to do. It's the only place it's not really interesting is the tanks, who need to just block the one AoE. And I think that you being able to basically always stand in the exact same spot for blocking the AoEs takes a lot out of it, if that makes sense. Like, I almost wish the tanks needed to be way closer to their ad without touching the feathers on the outside, in order to, like maybe if the first person hit was too far away, it did more damage or something like that. But if the first person hit was really close, then the fall off damage was based on that. That would go a long way. I think that would make it incredible. But I mean, it's a really good, like, last little dance between the landslides and, once again, needing somebody with the right wind debuff, you know, somebody with the wind debuff to eat the thing there. Not to mention it leads into raid-wide AoE, the feathers, like everything's present in a really good way here. Even eruptions are just like used as a means of kind of forcing you to start in a certain way. And I think it just works really well. It's a little too static in terms of where all the primals actually are. But that means that when suppression starts, while you can be in your starting position really early, it also doesn't have much of a windup. You know how like Dynamis Delta and Sigma and Omega kind of have these really long windups before anything actually happens? It's kind of nice that the cast begins and you just instantly kind of go. Pretty much like as soon as ultimate disappears, reappears 2 seconds later, you're good. I like that. And that's what most ultimates do except for Omega. So yeah, that one's going in good. I really like suppression. 10 strike is also actually 10 strike might go in incredible. I think 10 strike is the highlight of all of the trios in UCOB. It's payoff again for making sure that you have all of the neuro links in the right spot. It asks you to understand and flex very quickly in order to make sure you have blockers or you're spread for the AoEs coming from Nail. And then the swaps, the only downside is the bug with the orbs where they can kind of like drift off to the side randomly. I hate that when that happens. But it goes into that, which is a very exacting position check, into a second exacting position check, which somehow always gets people. Really simple solutions, but really quick executions that pan out well. Not to mention the final bit at the end where, you know, you have to heal up and make sure that you actually survive that big final AoE. That part's not that bad, but I mean, it's just, it comes together in such like a masterful way. It's, again, it's a golden standard that I think goes above and beyond of what a higher end ultimate mechanic can look like. And payoff from earlier parts in the fight, definitely a big thing I like to see. Really exact execution, lots of frequent damage. If you're going to do a downtime phase, stuff like 10 strike I think is the way to go. Time stop. I think time stop is good. Time stop's one of those, gets a chuckle. It's kind of fun to do. It has that initial shock. And it also like takes a little bit of quick problem solving. A lot of people screw it up. It's also really iconic to the raid, to the fight. It kind of just hits on all cylinders. There's just nothing too crazy about it. Like if there was multiple time stops and you needed to like switch positions between them, or if maybe Alexander gave you things and then locked them in for like way late. Like honestly, if during time stop you got debuffs that he then permafroze on you until the perfect Alexander phase, oh my, yo, it'd be so much better. That'd be so cool. But as it is, I think it's good. I'm gonna stick it in good. And then Titan, man, I have a lot of goods. I have a really hard time with being overly critical because of just me taking the wording a little bit too exactly. Titan's better than Garuda and Ifrit, so it cannot go into the bad territory. The jails are really exacting and well done. The knockback there is really good. The double landslides always get people. The bombs in the middle are okay. I think, I think it's an average. Like, I don't really care that much about the Titan phase. A lot of it's just dodging the double landslides and making sure that the jails are lined up properly. Like that's like almost the entirety of the phase. So yeah, I think I'm just going to stick it in average. I don't think I'm that impressed. It's sad because a long time ago, I would have definitely put that higher up, but yeah, I think that's going to go in average. Trines. I mean, they're trines. Like that's all they are. I don't know why they waste like 40% of Perfect Alexander's health on trines and then like a split tank buster into a normal tank buster. It's so much of the Perfect Alexander fight. I honestly don't ever do something like that again. Like if you're going to do trines, you got to do better than that. That's it. The thing is, I don't know if it's the case. I wonder if the True Heart buff makes you able to see the trines in advance, similar to the way that it allows you to see the fate projections from alpha and beta. I mean, even if it does, I guess that doesn't functionally change because the odds of you ever getting the trines without the True Heart is like so low. So yeah, honestly, trines goes in terrible, never do it again. It's such an uninteresting way to like wrap up the back half of what's already a kind of underwhelming final phase. Twintanya. Don't ever do that to me again. I mean, I guess technically, is it really that bad? Yes. But like, it's so lame. Like even on content, it wasn't that good. Like it was cool to see them. It's so weird because Nail and Twin have kind of the same problem in that they are basically just barely amped up versions of their original fights and of really small portions of their original fights. But Twintanya, like, the way I feel about Looper is the way I feel about the entirety of Twintanya. It's like, I hate doing it every single time. And then there's other little things like being able to, like, outrange the Liquid Hells, but then, like, if you're like a dancer doing it, your dances aren't even in range. Like, you can't get too close. You can't go too far. It's like, why make that little, like, why? Why bother with that little detail that just makes it that mild bit more tedious if you're on certain jobs? Yeah, that one's going in terrible. Vault Knights, average or good. I don't think they're incredible, but they set the tone really, really well. They kind of act as like a brief reminder of some of the mechanics before you do them in the Thornton fight proper. And it's a really fast-paced phase with a lot of variety in mechanics. I mean, the dashing phase, I mean, even just the baiting of the axe swings and the lasers and all of that. That definitely is good. Vault Knights is like, when I think about it, a shockingly good introduction to DSR. And it also, while it sets up the rewind, and I do appreciate that it sets up the rewind, that section is fine on its own without needing the rewind to, again, bump you back to it and just make you have to do extra AoE mitigation healing and the killing of the spear. It also is a really sad way to start, just for the same reason with the spear. So yeah, no, that lands in good. I didn't think that was going to land there, but when I think about it, yeah, Vault Knights is a lot of fun. The only thing I'll knock with Vault Knights is, much like any other fight, needing to get a checkpoint whenever you zone back in kind of sucks, but it's a really short phase. It's not like it's a 7.5 minute to 8 minute checkpoint boss. It's like a 2.5 minute checkpoint boss. So yeah, I think it's fine. Wormhole. So I have always been of the opinion that Wormhole is not that fun or even hard of a mechanic. I think objectively, the fact that it's so easy for any of the 8 people to screw it up does indeed make it on the harder scale of mechanics that's in T. I've always found it terribly boring and all too easy. It's just a lot of learning. It's not even like it's super hard to do executionally. It's just a lot of learning of possibilities. And I don't know. It doesn't interest me as much. Like, all the mistakes feel really small and dumb. Like, when somebody makes a mistake, like when you're like, after you've learned the whole thing and you can kind of do it, you just kind of go like, nah, shit, I forgot to arm's length. I forgot to surecast, or I moved 1 pixel too far to the left. I moved 1 pixel too far to the right. I didn't move enough pixels to the left. Like, it's just like a really tiny, like, doesn't feel good to wipe mistake. But I don't think it's a bad mechanic. That one's going to go in average. I'm not crazy about the entirety of the Alexander phase, as you can tell. And now we just have 2 DSR mechanics. Wrath of the Heavens and Sanctity of the Ward. Wrath of the Heavens is very much like another trio from UCOB, but I think it's on the better side. I like Death of the Heavens more. And I think Wrath of the Heavens is a little diminished by the fact that it is just like UCOB trios, essentially. But would I say it's only average? I don't know. Death of the Heavens might have to go up to incredible, because Wrath of the Heavens, I think, is fine. It's just a little snoozeville, because the first bit is just like, it's just the last bit. Yeah, I'm going to go with average on Wrath of the Heavens. I do like it. I think it is good. But it's on like a level of good that doesn't belong in the good tier, if that makes sense. Hey, come back here, Sanctity of the Ward. I'm not done with you. Man, this is, again, kind of similar to Looper. The fact that it's so early in the fight, just, the PTSD. I think executionally, Sanctity of the Ward is super well done. There's so many little things you can do to have skill expression in here, on top of there being very static ways of resolving things based on the positions of the knights. But like, you need to have a lot of good permutation knowledge in order to do it in a flash. You need to worry about the eye. You need to worry about Thornton himself. You have to worry about the meteors, about any adjusts you need to do. It definitely allows for good player expression of skill. So I am going to stick Sanctity of the Ward in good. And with that, we have all of our mechanics. So based strictly on which mechanics I like most, which one is the winner here? We've got 2 in S rank for UCOB, 1 for Uwu, 3 for top, and 2 for DSR. I'm really scared that top has the most S ranks. Like, I'm really scared for that. I have 4 in good for T. I have 4 in good for DSR, 2 in good for top, feeling better now, 3 in good for UCOB, and 3 in good for Uwu. I've got 4 in... I think UCOB is kind of cheating because I think UCOB has more mechanics like that are individually named. But 4 for UCOB, 4 for T, 3 for top, 2 for Uwu, and 2 for DSR. Then in bad, I have what looks like 1 from each except for Uwu, which has 2. And then in terrible, I have 2 from top, 1 from D, and then 1 from 3. I don't have any bads from Uwu in there. I guess I don't have any terrible never do it agains. Yeah, I don't know. I think based on this, I think so I have a tier list of these all in order, and it's a lot of bias about the overall fights. But looking at this, it looks like T would come out on top. No, is that just because T has more mechanics? I don't know. I'm trying to judge it just based on this. I think I have to assign a point system, but even then, they have an uneven number of mechanics between all of them, so it's kind of cheating. Either way, I have an entirely separate video where I actually talk about how I feel about all the individual fights, but this is my tier list of every individual mechanic from every ultimate in Final Fantasy XIV, at least up to and through patch 6.3. When 7.1 rolls around, we'll see what gets added to this little tier list. So, with that, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let me know what you agree with and disagree with in the comment section of the video below. And with that, I will see you in the next one. Until then, I bid you adieu. Take care.